Welcome to Divine Decode, the space where reflection becomes revelation. I am your host, Pragya, and tonight we are diving into one of the most underestimated forces shaping our lives: perspective. Our guest, Judy Gaman, is a CEO, storyteller, and wellness leader whose work reminds us that the meaning of life often hides in the moments we rush past. Her award winning memoir, born from the wisdom of a centenarian friend, teaches us that how we see the world matters just as much as what we experience in it. Tonight, we slow down, breathe, and ask if perspective can change everything, what else becomes possible when we choose a new way of seeing? And with that, I am truly glad, Judy, that I'm talking to you today, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. And yeah, perspective is a very important topic for all of us.
I agree to that. And to begin with, I would love to know that when you think of perspective as the invisible architecture of our lives, what do you believe separates a worldview that expands us from one that quietly keeps us small? And often we do not realize that, but there are so many perspectives and there are so many thoughts that keep on coming from every part of the place, from here and there and all over the world. So, what is your take on that?
I really believe the heart of perspective lies around not being in an echo chamber, meaning don't just hang out with people in your own space, where exactly where you live on an emotional level, even a spiritual level, or where you live on an intellectual level. Every person that we meet, every place that we go, everything that we experience is how we shift and change our perspective. And you mentioned my book, Love Life and Lucille. My perspective on life changed so much when I spent some time with people over 100, and specifically with Lucille Fleming. It's really about allowing ourselves to get outside of the this is the way it's always been done. This is the way I think. You know, in my village, in my town, and in my world, and wherever your village, town, or world is, there's so much life out there, and being able to expand your horizons. And I'm not saying turn your back on those beliefs, not at all. I'm saying to actually form your experience, your frame of reference for you as an individual, and then make those choices of, what is true, and some truths are absolute, and then how does it apply to me, and then how do I share the love that I've absorbed, and how do I turn off the negativity that's so often we absorb by the people that we come in contact with, or a world that shouts there's so much wrong. We need to be able to focus on and shift that perspective to what's going right. And I think it was Ronald Reagan, one of our US presidents, who said, and I love this quote, you don't have to be the smartest guy in the room. You just have to surround yourself with smarter people. And I don't know that I got that quote exactly right, but that's the gist of it. And I really believe that as we allow ourselves to be around people that have different perspectives, that have more knowledge than we do, we can really be a sponge and kind of soak that up and mold our own lives.
That's totally, totally true. And it's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I truly agree. And thank you for also sharing that quote, because that is actually the simplest way to understand this, right? We force ourselves to be the smartest person. And sometimes then we regret doing that.
Yeah, that's how you get stuck. If you're always the smartest person in the room,
Yeah, but we don't.
yeah, if you always want to be the top dog, or be the expert, but you're not opening yourself up to learning from others, your growth will stop. And we all are about growing and changing, and how do we do that? We surround ourselves with people that know more than we do.
We totally forget that it is not something that can be forced. And to continue with, you have met extraordinary people, right? Thinkers, survivors, elders, leaders. So, was there a conversation or even a small human moment that fundamentally shifted the way you see the world? Or was there a perspective that changed something in you?
Well, I think the most, and you're right, I've met so many people. I've been in rooms with US presidents and senators and celebrities and you name it. I've realized one thing, and that is, everybody put their pants on one leg at a time. And so there's so much more that we have in common just with the human experience. And I also believe that even age defies this, country, borders, and such defy this. One thing that I came to realize when I was spending time with Lucille Fleming, who at the time I spent time with her from the time she was 100 years old until just before she passed away 2 weeks shy of her 104th birthday, is that regardless of what decade you were born and when you live, that human experience is the same. We all have felt pain. We all have felt love. We all have a real deep down desire to be good and to do good. And we also know what it feels like to be disappointed either by others or even disappointed in ourselves. And it's all about really wrapping your brain around the human experience and not thinking of the human experience as what we see on social media and where people post their best side. They look like they're always on vacation, and oh my gosh, with the filters, there's not a wrinkle on them. And we tend to get into this like compare game. But spending some time with Lucille at a very pivotal point in my life when I really was working way too many hours, working 60 hours a week, but wearing that like a badge of honor because my own parents were workaholics. So I was a third, fourth generation workaholic and didn't really appreciate anyone who wasn't. I know this sounds really crazy, maybe even a little bit harsh, but I just grew up with that mindset. If you're not busy, you're not doing something, you're wasting time. And having those years with someone who was over 100 years old, who came to the United States from Canada in the middle of the Great Depression with a locket around her neck and a suitcase in her hand. And at that time, she's a woman, a single woman, and puts herself through school, nursing school, gets a job, eventually gets married, has children, and that real perseverance is really what's in the human spirit, regardless of where we are. We want to do better. We want to accomplish. And some people are more competitive than others. And I'm not necessarily speaking about competition and unhealthy competition. I'm more looking at it from the perspective of just competing with yourself on the level of how can I be better tomorrow? And as long as we really hold on to that, how can I do better tomorrow? How can I be better tomorrow? Then really our perspective of what tomorrow looks like is so different and it's full of so much promise.
That truly is. And thank you for that wisdom and thank you for that anecdote. Because these real life stories, they change something in you and they shift the major perspective of you. So thank you for that. To move on, let's talk about your memoir. It is rooted in the wisdom of someone who lived an entire century, and it's commendable. So, what do people who have lived that long understand about perspective, about patience, time, regret, joy that younger generations often overlook? So what is the difference, and where is the younger generation lacking, or what are they overlooking, and which is a major part of what people earlier have thought and lived. So yeah, what is your take?
Well, Pragya, I'm going to tell you a story because when I met Lucille Fleming, prior to writing my book, Love, Life and Lucille, I was working on a different book called Age to Perfection, How to Thrive to 100 Happy, Healthy, and Wise. And at that time, I really was just studying the blue zones, where people live to be very vibrant, well into their 90s and even past the century mark. And I decided at one point, I had this idea, why don't I just ask the people who were over 100, how did they get there? And they gave me their top 10 list, and there were things that were on the top 10 list for a lot of these people. I mean, there definitely was a common thread. You have a lot of friends. Make sure that you exercise. Eat the right things, and don't necessarily skimp on the other things, but do them in moderation. There were just some really, really great nuggets of wisdom. Have a higher power. Believe in a higher power, so you don't have to just carry all those burdens on yourself and in your own heart and mind. And then right before the book was going to come out, I said to myself, and I had a writing assistant at the time, I said, I feel like we're missing something. I'm not sure what it is. And then one night I couldn't sleep, and I really thought about, how do these people know this? And where do we lose sight of some of these things? So I went into the classroom. So I went into a classroom of they were either kindergarten or first graders. They were really young elementary students, and asked them the question: what do you think it takes to live to 100 and be happy and healthy and wise? And you know what was shocking is these children mirrored the same answers that I got from the people over 100. Like, oh, you gotta have a lot of friends. Well, you gotta make sure in their mind, you gotta join a gym, which was the exercise. You gotta eat healthy food. And then of course, the one child, you gotta have a bowl of ice cream, strawberry ice cream. That's what's gonna make you live longer. And the funny thing about that was it really set me on a little bit of a different direction when I went out on book tour. I started thinking more about, what do we lose if we are born with this knowledge? I mean, these kids just spouted this off like they were experts. So we're kind of born with knowing what is the healthy way to live. What is the way we're meant to live? Obviously be social. All of these things that both the children and the people over 100 really they agreed upon, not even knowing that what the other had said. And if we really look at what happens to us during this human experience that squashes that spirit, and then how do some people, like the people I interviewed over 100, still hold on to what they know to be a truth, and what they know innately in their hearts is right, while others kind of stray, and they tend to get very ill, very sick. Um, they they maybe are very pessimistic. They maybe don't even have the joy of life or the desire to live to be 100. I asked a lot of people over my years, do you want to live to be 100? And it's surprising how many people say, oh, no. Oh my gosh, no way, no way. Because in their minds, they think they know what 100 looks like. I've seen what 100 could look like. And you really have to ask ourselves how much of our minds, our bodies, and our spirits are being influenced in a negative way by either the media or by the marketing efforts of people. I mean, you want to look at good marketing, look at the cereal box, Um, and look at some of the packaging and of the ultra processed foods that we know are not good for us, we know are killing us. And the strength that's behind and those messages, the power that's behind these messages that really turn us away from having a good social life. I mean, we saw what happened during the pandemic when people weren't together and spending time together and they were separated. It was unnatural. We saw the rates of depression go up. We saw the rates of heart attacks go up, strokes go up. So we know that being with other people is very important to our longevity. And we also are being bombarded with what not to eat rather than what to eat and the convenience of that. I really, I was a child in the 80s. I was born in the 70s, but I was a very much of an age that was influenced easily upon when I entered the 80s. And we saw a lot of excess, you got to have more, you got to do more. We saw, I call it the drive-through generation. Eating became not so much something that happened around the kitchen table, but more of something that happened in the car after going through a drive-through on the way to whatever sports or event that you're signed up for the day. And somewhere we lost that idea that we need rest, that we don't always need to be on, we don't always need more. And I really believe that when we're born and when we're children, we have that. And I do believe that the people that can hang on to that and they can resist all these messages that the world is giving them to the contrary, those are the people that are going to not just live into their 90s and into their hundreds, but into, past 100. But I really believe that they are going to do so with grace and they're going to do so with beauty. And I met so many people over 100 that had very clear minds and had very good purpose. And isn't that what we all want? We want a clear mind and we want to have purpose in our life.
Yes, that's true. That's true. And thank you so much for the wisdom because I truly, truly agree. And surrounding ourselves with such people, um, it's not always you forcing it, right? You just surround yourselves with a few people and then you automatically and somehow you just start feeling or start thinking the way others do. And it's not to replicate them, but something in you shifts. And thank you so much for that. Also, as a leader and storyteller, you have helped people move from reactive thinking to intentional seeing. And I'm curious, how do you guide someone to step back from emotional reflex and lead them to step into a more grounded, empowered perspective? And there are always extremes, and humans are rigid sometimes. So, how do you find this flexibility, and how do you let them take that step?
Well, as the CEO at Executive Medicine of Texas, we see people from all over the globe. And they fly in, they want to know what their health status is. They want to know what they can do to live longer, to live healthier, and increase their energy and all these kinds of things. And the irony is what we give them is not a magic pill. It is not a one size fits all. What we give them is we spend a day with them, really testing them, getting all the metrics. And this is important because just as with anything in life, you have to know where you are before you can know where you want to go or where you need to go or what the path is, what's the roadmap. And what we find so much with our patients is they don't, whether it is in their physical health, maybe it's in their emotional health, maybe they're suffering from workaholism and nobody's holding a mirror up to them and saying, "Hey, let's take a deep dive and see what's really going on so that we can help you." So I think there's a few things here that are really important. And that is, first of all, you have to gather the facts. And sometimes those facts aren't pretty. Sometimes we don't want to see them, but we have to. We have to say, let's look at the truths of what's going on. Let's look at the facts. Let's lay it out in black and white. And then let's go from there. And the second thing that's so important is that you can't really do all this by yourself. You really have to have someone on your team. We often say we're the quarterback for people's health, but you really have to have someone on the team that knows what the game is, and the game being what's your current situation, where do we want to go from where you are to where you want to be. And then they also have the team to do that. We all need to have people on our team. Now, whether I'm using the analogy of what we do at executive medicine, but this could be within your business. If you don't know where you want to go with your business, then you can't lead others to get there. This could be with your family. If you don't know what you want your family to look like, in the sense of what does my home feel like? What do my children need to learn from me? If you haven't really examined what is this that I want for whatever it is, then you can't possibly get to where you want to be, because it's takes time. Everything takes time, and everything takes work, and everything takes facts. You have to know. So that is always our advice, regardless, and my own personal advice too, regardless of what you're looking at, whatever it is that you need a new perspective on, whatever it is you want to grow, whatever it is you want to do, you have to first figure out where you are, and then you have to look at who's on your team and who's going to help you get there, and then have a plan. That's really the best way to keep from having anxiety, stress, and disappointment.
Oh my God, that's so true. And to add on to this, I know that this makes perspective something that people can practice daily, and um, this makes it so much clearer. And Judy, thank you for sharing such grounded wisdom and soulful clarity with us tonight. You have reminded us that perspective is not just how we see the world, it's how we allow the world to shape us, and that is what matters. And to everyone listening, take one quiet moment today, pause, breathe, and ask yourself, what story am I telling? Shift the angle just a little. You might find that what felt heavy, it begins to feel meaningful. And that is what I'm taking from Judy today. And I hope you resonate with that too. I am Pragya Malvia, and this is Divine Decode. Until next time, choose the perspective that leads you towards peace, possibility, and a life lived with intention.